For a transcript of this episode, training plans, and more, visit marathonsfortherestofus.com. Okay, so there's a lot of factors that go into deciding on a marathon, right? The marathon is a very big undertaking, both in terms of the training and the race itself, and you want to give yourself the best opportunity to have a good experience. If you're trying to run a fast time, you want to give yourself your best opportunity to run a fast time. So we need to take a lot of factors into account when deciding on a marathon. The first factor that I always like to think about is weather. All right, it's getting harder and harder to find races that consistently have good weather that are conducive to running well and having a good experience in the marathon. These days, I would say November to March is probably your best bet. I think a lot of the races like Chicago and Twin Cities and, races like that historically had been good places to run, it's just too hot now. And too hot too frequently. So I would aim for something more in the November, December, January, February timeframe, and maybe go into early part of March, depending on what part of the country you're looking at. Now, you also need to keep in mind what weather you're going to be training in, right? I'm here in Atlanta, and Atlanta in the summertime is really, really hot. So, for a lot of people, if they're training for a fall marathon and they're hoping for really good weather, well, like I said, if it's Chicago, if it's something early in the fall, they're not going to have done any training in 40-degree weather. So if they get lucky and they have a 40-degree day in the race, they're still not going to be prepared for it or able to take advantage of it as much as they could have been. And along those same lines, the training may just be harder to get in and harder to get quality training in over the summers because it is so hot and humid. So you want to think about the weather both in terms of the race day itself, but also the weather in terms of when you're going to be doing your training and what sort of conditions you're going to be subjecting yourself to then as well. Now, the second factor you want to think about is the course itself. Okay, now a lot of times for people's first marathons, or if they're trying to PR, they think, oh, a downhill marathon would be great. This would be so easy. But you really have to be careful with downhill marathons. They beat you up really, really badly. And a lot of downhill marathons are really only downhill for maybe the first 10, 15 miles, something like that. And so then if it flattens out at that point, or God forbid if it goes uphill at that point, your legs are totally trashed and it is going to feel like you're running in quicksand for those last 10 or 15 miles. So if you're looking at a downhill course, make sure that it's, a runnable downhill that's not too steep, and, try to find one that really is fairly consistent throughout the course rather than suddenly having a flat or an uphill section at the end. By the same token, a lot of people for their first marathons think a flat course would be good. Flat courses are fine. The problem you run into with flat courses is that you're using the same muscles over and over and over again in exactly the same way. So that can be really fatiguing and difficult to handle. But for a lot of people, that's worth the trade-off of not having to run a lot of hills. I think you want to look at something that has, some rolling hills to it. Something that isn't pancake flat, so that you're getting that variety in which muscles are being used and how they're being used, but still is not overly challenging and gives you a chance to run well. And you want to think about the course not just in terms of the elevation, but in terms of the logistics as well. And so that can be the logistics of either, the start and the finish, how you're going to get there, how you're going to coordinate somebody dropping you off, picking you up, but also what the crowd support looks like it's going to be like, how far apart are the aid stations, how frequent are they? Those sorts of things can matter a lot. If you're familiar with the area, you may be able to look at the course and say, wow, that stretch there is going to be a 5-mile stretch. It's always into the wind, right? If you know the area well, you know what the patterns are like weather-wise and wind-wise. There may be red flags in a situation like that where you look at the course and everything else lines up well, but miles 20 through 26 are going to be into the wind, and you don't want to deal with that. So, make sure you look at the course as a whole, not just the elevation factors. Now, the third factor I tell people to look at is you've got to look at the field size and you've got to look at the field quality. Field size, easy to figure out, right? You look at previous races, you see how many people finished. You know whether you like a small race or a big race, whether you like crowds or not. That one's easy. The field quality is a little bit trickier. You want to look through the previous race results to see if you have people that are running near the pace that you are planning on running, right? You want to make sure that you're not out there by yourself, even if it's a huge race. You may find pockets of times where there aren't a lot of people. And so you want to figure out what pace you think you're going to be running. Make sure that historically there have been people around that pace. That's going to help you stay motivated during the race. But then the other thing you need to look at is how they do their start wave assignments if they are doing start waves. And knowing how they put you in your corrals is really important, because it could be something totally random, or it could be that you have to run a qualifying time or something like that. And it's one thing to have people that are running about the same pace as you, but you really need to make sure that you're going to actually be able to run with them. And that means that you're going to be all starting in the same wave or all starting in the same corral. So make sure you look into that and take that into account, not just looking at how many people in previous races were running the same time that you want to run. Now, of course, location is going to be a factor that you want to take into consideration as well. You've got to decide whether you want to stay close to home or whether you want to travel. And if you're traveling, make sure that you're not spending the days leading up to the race having too much fun and being on your feet too long, or else you can really throw a lot of the training that you did to get ready for this race out the window. So if it is a place where you're going to want to do some sightseeing and you're going to want to spend some time visiting, really try to schedule that on the back end after the marathon is finished if you can, rather than doing it before the race. And if it's a big race, make sure that you can figure out the accommodations as well. A lot of these races, the hotels will fill up really quickly, or the hotels will have rates 2 or 3 times what they normally do. So make sure you take that into account when you're figuring out whether you want to travel or not as well. And then finally, I think you want to factor in sort of the miscellaneous factors. And this can be whether your friends or training partners are doing a race, if there's some sort of personal connection with the race, or it's a hometown race for you or something like that, good or bad reviews you've read online, all that should factor in as well. And ultimately, figuring out what type of race you want to run is going to be really dependent on what your goals are, and whether you're looking for a great experience, whether you're looking for a PR, what your training situation looks like. All those sorts of things are going to be the primary drivers in deciding on a marathon. So if you go through those factors, I think you'll definitely find some options that'll be a good fit for you, and you'll have a good experience regardless of what your goals are. Thank you as always for watching. I really appreciate it. If you have any comments or suggestions, leave them in the comment section below, and let me know if you have any ideas for future videos as well. Thanks so much for watching. We'll talk to you soon.